Hey everyone, we're back with another episode of WWBTD. What would the behavior team do? We are here with special guests from the Restorative Practices team. We're very excited to have Urwell and Deanna with us. And you know these faces. We have Shalonda, Jen, Ashley, and Joy. And I am Kate. So thank you. It's been a little while since we have a new episode out. So we are going to start with an icebreaker. No one knows the question, so it's going to be super mysterious. Okay, what is your favorite chip? Ashley Mosley.
Oh, I knew you were going to come to me first. You know, I got to think about this stuff. My favorite chip is, you know what? It's actually not a chip, but it comes in a chip bag, so I'm just going to bend the rules a little bit. Okay. I know it's not good for me. It's that red dye, but it's the Flaming Hot Cheeto popcorn. Change your life.
Wow. Okay. Okay, we've talked about this. Did you do the penny challenge? Not the challenge, but.
Oh, I haven't yet. I'm afraid.
Yeah. Everyone, you can shine pennies with hot Cheetos. Okay.
Wow, imagine what it does to your insides.
I don't want to imagine.
Shine your teeth.
You're well. What's your favorite chip?
I'm glad I have an answer for this because I just tried a chip recently that I really liked. I don't know how to pronounce it though, so someone might have to help me. I think it's called like Paquai or
I don't know what you're talking about.
It's P-A-Q-U-I. It like basically tastes to me like what I always wanted Doritos to taste like. It's like actually really hot and like pepper, you know?
What we're talking about?
Spanish, Bequi.
There you go, Pequi. Yeah, I will take that. I mean, I literally just stumbled across them when we were on a long drive. We like found them in a random gas station, and I don't usually eat chips, so it was like amazing discovery.
Wow.
They're the ones with the hot chip challenge.
Oh, I would believe it. They're very hot.
You can buy one at the gas stations, and like I did it. I bought it. I didn't do it. I tried to convince my son.
My brother and my nephew did that challenge. It was interesting to watch.
And do they come in different flavors? I'm trying to think if this is the chips that
I saw 2 flavors and we tried them both. I'm guessing the really hot one you guys are talking about is the ghost pepper. Yes, yeah, we couldn't like finish the bag. It was really hot.
Oh my goodness.
Spanish is Pequi.
Pequi. That's probably what it is. Yeah, Pequi.
Pequi. That's probably it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe French, Spanish, whatever.
Yeah, right. One of them, exactly.
Those pepper chips at Trader Joe's are actually really good, but you know, they could be hotter. Like I can eat that bag, you know, in comparison. Okay, Jen, what about you?
So I was like really thinking about this, and I'm sorry, I can't just choose one. Definitely a toss up between like regular nacho cheese Doritos, because I used to put them in my ham and cheese sandwiches like inside when I was in school, and that was just like ham. Life changing for sure. And then like I'm thinking of Pringles sour cream and onion. I can't stop. Like once you pop, can't stop. Like for real.
Yeah. Thank you. Shalonda.
Oh, I'm a classic girl. I like Lay's barbecue.
Nice.
Sandwich, I always go for Lay's, and you could bring me any little bag of Lay's, I'll be satisfied.
Sometimes that thin, light saltiness is really all you need.
That's all I need.
Yeah, I'm hungry now.
Whole bag.
I know it's dangerous.
It's
dangerous starting with these food ones in the morning. All right, Deanna.
Gosh, you all have really good options. So I'll kind of do a mixture of everybody, I think. To go off what Shalonda was saying, Lay's in a peanut butter and jelly sandwich was like my favorite thing, especially in college, because you get like the savory, the salty, the sweet. So try that. And it's also cheap. So it's great. Secondly would be, I love me some Flamin' Hot Cheetos, but I'm also quite the baby when it comes to Cheetos. So I buy a bag of regular and a bag of Flaming Hot, and I mix and like put them together. So it's like, because I also miss like some of the cheddar yumminess, you know, like the orange fingers is fun for me. I know that's most people's like, ugh, yuck. I had a friend that used to eat Cheetos with chopsticks because he hated the orange fingers. But anyway, those are probably my top two. I also like, it's a brand called Late July, and they have like a jalapeno lime, and that is also on my list. So maybe I'm a chip connoisseur. So top three is the game I'm playing today, is top three. So
I've actually seen students eat hot Cheetos with a fork because they're, you know, the same reason. I'm like, wow.
It's so funny. He would have his chopsticks in class, like eating his flaming hot Cheetos, and I'm over there like licking my fingers and getting Cheeto dust on every assignment, and I'm just like, what is happening? This is bougie.
I love it. All right, Joy, what about you?
Well, talk about life-changing. I just got the best tip ever because I'm one of those people. So I'm going to get chopsticks because I love like the Cheeto-y kinds of things, but I don't like the orange fingers. But my favorite tip is, and the only place I know where to get them is at Snarf's. And maybe you can buy them at the grocery store, but they sort of reserve it. And they're called voodoo chips.
Yes.
And they are so good. And I thought they'd be spicy, but they're not. They're just peppery and vinegary. And they're just, and with the
That sounds good.
Yeah. That tang. Oh my gosh. Yes. They don't even have a flavor. The flavor is voodoo. And that's why it's a mystery. So you got to go for it. And those who go for it, you discover how amazing. Thank you, Joy, for mentioning that. So as far as, classic for me, I'm just like salt and vinegar all the way. I do prefer a kettle chip. But I'm like salivating now. There's actually a brand, I'm not even sure the brand of chip, but there's salt and vinegar chips from Subculture are so good. They've got this like salt and vinegar like dust on them. Oh, it's so wonderful. And then I do have to give a shout out to the truffle potato chips from Trader Joe's. If you like truffle, which I know it's not for everyone, oh my goodness, it's amazing.
I need my pen and paper.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, everyone, we got snacks for days.
Here, actually, I'm already here.
I need a chip. Like a chip.
And I can you forward that to all of us?
Right.
Yes.
And I'm like, Peking?
Hey, girl, write it for you.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. All right, now
an icebreaker.
Back to business. So we do have, again, if you missed it, I know it was like 10 minutes ago. Our two guests today are Urwell and Deanna. They are from the Restorative Practices team. And so Urwell, I would just like you to kind of introduce yourself and maybe just discuss or explain your role and kind of what your team does.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So there are two of us. Deanna and I are better halves with each other. We're supporting all the schools in the district with, the larger issues of training, integration, application, responding sometimes to incidents, and really like a train the trainer support system. So, something arises in the school, we don't see ourselves as the answer, right? We see ourselves more as like a coaching support team to work with the staff. If they have deans of culture or ed coaches or restorative process counselors, things like that, that we're going to work with them, with their leadership to figure out how is best to move forward with the community to find some repair and reintegration for that issue. But I think I'll point out that we're really focused on that word practices because we want this to be seen as and understood for what it wholly is, which is large changes throughout the entire cultural development, the practices, the procedures, who you're hiring, how you're training, how you are showing up in response to each other, how you build your spaces. All of those things fall into these categories of restorative process and partnership education that we really focus on. And then I guess to say a little bit about myself, again, my name is Urwell, and Deanna and I both are in year 2 of this role with the district, so excited to be here and continuing to learn. Our backgrounds are similar and different. We both, funny enough, moved here from Oregon a few years ago, doing different things, majority of my work has been between academia, nonprofits, and like government agencies, all in connection often to K through 12 work. So I work in equity, belonging, and inclusion, very specifically in education. And so really looking at why we have these quote unquote issues that arise, whether it's in engineering at the academic level or in K to 12, where are these kind of offshoots and streams that we see leading children in certain directions, and where are we actually taking the amazing theories and ideas that already exist in the world and starting to apply them to create something different. I'll just kind of pause there.
Awesome. Thank you. Deanna.
Well, how do you follow up on that? It was beautifully said. Thank you, Yerwell. So I am the other half of the better half, right? And a little bit more about what we do in the district. I think Yerwell explained it very well. We also have cohort work and also have more district-wide work. And so that's where some of our roles differ a little bit. And so I focus more on district-wide implementation and support, working more specifically with our RP coordinators and ed counselors. And Eurowell has the opportunity to work with a cohort of schools looking to do more of like a deep dive into implementation and evaluation. So just kind of a little bit more of a blurb of what we do. About myself, like Yerwell explained too, we have similar backgrounds and we've spent time in the same place, which is really cool. So I moved here from Oregon and my background is kind of a little all over the place. I started in school with social work, moved into a master's in conflict and dispute resolution and focused that in law, and then realized I'm not really interested in law. I'm interested in all the alternatives to law. And so I realized at that point, my brain was thinking, what are the alternatives to most things? And that really gave me interest in program evaluation, policies and procedures, and more specifically around what's happening to our various demographics, people of color, and really just found a passion and interest in equity work. And as I looked at that and explored maybe being a lawyer for a minute and things like that, I thought, oh goodness, we're already at the end, right? We're already working with adults in the justice system. And I really wanted to figure out where this all stemmed from. And so that led me more into a K-12 setting and working more with youth. And I kind of rewound a little bit and started from the beginning to figure out really where there was systemic pieces or policies or whatever else kind of in place to perpetuate this cycle that we see for individuals. So that's a little bit more about me, and maybe I could pause there.
Awesome. I definitely am impressed with just the breadth of the work that you guys both kind of tackle. So thank you just right now for all the things that you do for the district. I know you were touching on it a little bit, and I just wanted to get a little bit of clarity around restorative practices in general, because I know this, there's a million acronyms in education. There's also restorative justice. I heard you actually use process instead of practice. So if you could just kind of give us or explain that a little bit, that would be great. Whoever wants to take it.
Either way. I can start in your well if you want to add to it. So I think one of the biggest differences I think we could talk about is the difference between restorative justice and restorative practices. Restorative justice, as a lot of people know, it originated in juvenile justice systems. And there's a lot of practices that originated around like school to prison pipeline, or even arguably home to prison pipeline. And when people were thinking about this, they were coming up with these strategies, right, and kind of putting it in a bucket. Well, justice has a connotation of consequences or punishment or punitive, even though the idea of being a restorative justice, kind of leads in a less punitive way. When you transfer that over to education, we're not looking at justice, right? We're looking at implementation, programming, policy change, and it's not like the justice system, right? We want to separate those things because again, justice is like you're looking for a particular outcome, or there's an objective that you're looking for. And in schools, we're not looking for that, right? We're looking to explore, be innovative, understand like what skills are needing development or what kinds of supports we can offer. And so by having practices in place, that lends a hand to that and changes the language so that we're not really looking for something in particular when we're putting these procedures or certain policies into practice. And I'll let Uriel kind of explain practice to process.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. So I think there's a small distinction. Really, you can use either word interchangeably because the process is this long-term process that any community, whether it's a school or a family or whoever it is, decides that they're going to become restorative and learn to work with each other. It's a long-term process. And so when you look at like restorative process guides for schools, when it talks about that transition and implementation, every guide makes very clear you're on a several year trajectory, right? You're on a 3 to 10 year trajectory of change for a community because schools have been set up in direct connection and often in modeling of the judicial system, not of a healthy community that is there to build whole, healthy people, right? So when we talk about that, we're talking about the whole process of becoming a restorative community, and the practices are what get us to that, right? The practices are changing our hiring, changing the way we set up our school days, changing the way we respond to children and see their behavior as communication instead of something to shut down and modify, right? Or to make feel better for the adults. So I think that's really just the distinction. You could use them very interchangeably. And I also think, just on an important note, that if we want to see a different outcome for children, right, in connection to the judicial system, the first step is really removing that language. Like, why are we tying ourselves in any way in connection to that? I'm triggered, honestly, when I hear people talking about student offenses. That's a policing word, right? Why are we looking at the behavior and the need of the child as an offense? And so I think it's just distancing ourselves from that and getting to the point of what we're supposed to be here, which is student education and scholar development.
You both mentioned the process, like this being a process. You said 3 to 10 years, or did you say 3 to 10? Did I make that up in my head? Okay.
Right, you're right.
3 to 10 years. And so my question for parents, how could you make, like, what are some foundational pieces of the restorative process that we can use at home?
That's a great question.
I actually, if you don't mind, Dan, I'll share a little. I was actually just having this conversation with my dad last night on the phone. And one of the tools that we were talking about in idea of changing the dominator power dynamic that adults think they're supposed to have, right, in advising or directing a child, is, I think, looking at, this is just one tool, there's many, I'm sure Dan has other answers, but I think one that's really foundational is the social discipline window, which we can share with you guys, and you're welcome to share out with families. Those are the kind of diagrams that print out and hang it in front of your face, right? If you're at a desk, hang it on your wall, stick it to your desk, whatever, like start to think about your life and what you do in this way. And what it kind of breaks down for us is looking at high levels of control versus punishment. Are we doing something to someone to get them to correct and change so that they are better for us? Are we neglecting them? And frankly, neglect is the highest form of child abuse within the country of the United States. It's something to deeply think about. Are you just neglecting something that you're seeing and distancing yourself from it, or not dealing with it because you don't know how, it's too much trouble, it's going to interrupt what you're doing? And then on the other side, we have someone who, you know, often in compassion or empathy, just does something for someone, right? So they kind of get them out of the way, do it for them. It's easier, it's faster. Maybe it's even out of compassion, like I said, because they see someone struggling. But again, we have not taught that person anything. They haven't grown. They're not able to participate better. So when we try to work with, and that's what that diagram shows us, like with is that other option, the fourth option, that changes everything, right? We can even look at our policies, our procedures, our responses, our relationships of how and where are we working with, and then to start thinking about ourselves in these different aspects, or the work that we do, or the group that we're a part of. Because frankly, a lot of times the reason we can't work with someone is maybe not even ourselves. It might be because of the way our policy structure is set up and our procedures, or our discipline matrix, right? That points us towards doing to or doing for, instead of actually working with someone to help them develop. And so I think that that is one of the keys of really changing your mind about adult-child power dynamics is if we're there to help them grow into healthy people and to gain skills and to understand themselves better, how are we doing that with them? Because that's the whole goal, is to propel them into the world, right?
Right.
I guess I would also add, I would add two things. One, active listening, and I would also add a curious mindset. I know active listening is like, well, we do that, right? We hear what people say, but I think there's a really big difference between hearing and truly listening, and understanding what that really means, right? A lot of the times when in communication styles, when you hear something from somebody, you're already waiting to reply. And so you're really excited to say what you're going to say. If it's an argument, or if you're even if you're just happy about something, we hear like the first couple words of a sentence, and then we're like, oh my gosh, I have all these thoughts, right? And especially if it's in a frustrating situation, when you're, working with your child around challenging behavior, you're already ready. Like, you're ready to get in there and you're ready to say something. And so really trying to actively listen to what it is that the behavior might be telling you, or what maybe that student or scholar or child is literally telling you. It's really trying to figure out, like, what do those words mean? What do those actions mean? And I think that leads also to that curious mindset of what's kind of happening around us. How do we evaluate this situation real quick before I react? And I think that goes into some proactive type strategies that we use in schools a lot, but also could be used as a foundation. I know for myself, it's like, wow, I had a breakdown the other day. I had to really think about, like, where did that come from? It wasn't the toaster not working that was really bothering me. It was these other things, right? And so I think that lends to trauma-informed practices and some other strategies as well. But I think to give you kind of a brief overview, I think those two pieces in connection to what you're all saying is really important.
I love that. I think those are all really great and helpful tips. Something that I, as a parent of two little boys, have been struggling with a bit, because we were in the house together 24/7 for 10 months, with no breaks. And so, like, even though these two little boys love each other so much, they fight a lot. And like that, like, conflict resolution part is something that I feel like if I had a little bit more tips on. I don't know if you guys have any, like, go-to practices that parents can try in those moments where kids are just like not getting along, like, it'll end up being a fight, or like really physical, or he took this, and I don't know. Do you have any like little suggestions that maybe can be go-tos for parents like that in those situations?
This is like scripted. Your question goes perfectly into what Deanna just said. Deanna, keep going.
Well, one thing that comes to mind is thinking about the restructuring of questions. And what I mean by that is we sometimes ask questions, or our society's kind of set us up, and the juvenile justice system has set us up to say, like, what is it that you did, right? Like, who did this, what's wrong, and what's the punishment? And as we restructure that and think about who is impacted, what's the responsibility each person holds in that situation, and then how do we repair harm? When you think about shifting your mind into asking different questions, I think that lends to getting different answers, and it also helps with skill development. I will also give a disclaimer with this, is as parents or even educators are learning how to reframe questioning, having a curious mindset, learning to actively listen, students and kids are also learning that, right? If a parent's been like, what are you doing forever? And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, what's going on right now? That's a really big transition. And so as we think about how we're asking or changing our questions, we have to give a little bit of time for our students and kids to be able to understand, like, whoa, mom switched it up on me. What's going on? I don't know how to answer this question. So I just want to give a little bit of a kind of disclaimer there of, like, as adults are learning this process, students and kids are learning it along with you. And it might take a little bit of time, but to kind of add to that, I think a conversation around impact and maybe even intentionality versus impact, I think is really important. I think that helps with hiring the level of accountability to understand what it is my actions did for other people or how that caused harm. And I think recognizing, it's like, it's not that you just screamed in class, it's that now these other students are, having a hard time or weren't able to get on track or whatever it might be. Thinking about that, I think, is really helpful. And even if a student or a child is thinking like, I didn't mean to do that. I think that's an answer we hear a lot, is like, I didn't mean that. It's still having that conversation of, there's a lot of things that we do that we don't mean to be harmful, but it can be, it can be received that way. And so kind of talking through intentionality versus impact, I think, can be really helpful with some of these things.
That's awesome. Thank you. Are there any, like,
I wanted to add one other thing, sorry, just because I think it's really important to these situations, is just having those questions and discussions that Deanna just talked about separately. So like not in the heated moment, not in the room with the two people, right? It's that kind of separation so that they have a chance to go sit and think and actually answer questions with you and come back. And I just think that's a really important point, because when we're in the heat of the moment and we are elevated and escalated, right? Like we can't reflect and we're going to be defensive. So I think that's just a note, is also like, it's good for us to go separate for a minute and think and answer those questions separately and then come back together.
I love that. That is definitely, yeah, very important. Are there any other books that you would recommend for like parents, and that's something we can add to this episode, but like any books that maybe parents can like good go-to books that you recommend?
I have a kind of a series of books, but they're really, I have found them really helpful. They're very quick reads, which I think is usually appealing.
Yes.
It's a series called The Little Books, I believe is what they're called. And they are just, I want to say like 50 to maybe 80 pages. Like they're very thin, but they're in all topics of restorative justice, restorative practices. They have some specifically around like incarceration or in the classroom, and I'm almost positive they have one specifically around like transitioning in like a home setting, how to use like RP in the household. But there's a whole series there that I think, even if I'm totally making that up, and there isn't that specific book, I think all of the various like foundational skills in each one of those is very, very helpful. I've probably read 10 different ones and used them in all of life. So I think that could be definitely a good resource, and I can help you get some links to that.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Something that's also just a different than a book, but is a simple, useful site I found with parents, is called Random Acts of Kindness. And it's, teachers can use it, parents can use it, but it gives you lessons and activities and things to do to really focus on like learning what compassion versus empathy is, what is kindness and care in a community and being a part of a family and things like that. And it, I think, gives a way for the parent to not just be intellectually trying to change themselves, but to find a way to like actively engage with their kid in this kind of new accountability and discussion and focus. I also deeply believe that for all of us, there's a part of us that needs to give as much as we receive, right? And I think all the times we've been living through and the positioning in our homes and the changes in our lives, it's been kind of hard to know what to do. And so something like that can also give you and your child like a direction, something to do together that's active and engaging, to start like having a way to talk about this and to engage in a different way.
And I think you answered my question. I think both of you answered my question, because I was just like, as a parent, how do I get started? Where do I start with incorporating this RP thing into my own, relationship with my students and my home with my son? And so would you say that's a good start for trying to incorporate this in the home?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent start. I also think that, what we find in our work that maybe is different than many people's work is that we are working always on larger system issues and structures, as well as the intimacy of like human relationship, right? And human being mindset and perspective. We say a lot that the reason a lot of times RP doesn't work, people don't believe in it, or it doesn't show up where we think it should, is because people might cognitively get it, but they don't actually believe it. It's not in their attitude and perception of behavior, right? And so I think as a parent, that's the other thing I can recommend is like, what can you do for yourself that is caring for yourself and giving yourself time to do exactly what you're asking your child to do, right? Like if you want your child to be able to sit down and reflect on their behavior and to think about their feelings and their triggers, you have to
model that.
thing and model that for your child. And so I think for all of us, some people that is their spiritual practices, for some people that is their psychological, brain changing and working on themselves. Other people, they find it in different ways, right? And so I don't think there's one way, but I think that's the key, is that you are the living role model for regulation, modification, self-discipline, and accountability. And so where is that in you? How are you building that? And how are you reflecting that back in your home?
So it starts with us. We have to reflect and model the behaviors and the things that we need. And you're right. Thank you.
I have a question that sort of is about transferring it from school to home. How can we, because we work with teachers, how can we have some conversations that to give to staff that they can take to parents? Like, how do we transfer, because all of this is super valuable, but how do we, like, one of the things that you said that I wrote down was, are we changing the behavior for our benefit or for theirs? And that just really struck a note with me. So how do we get educators to take that message home? So when we're calling families, we're not saying, oh, this happened today and this is the discipline and this was the consequence. How do we create a relationship between the staff and the families that's more about changing the behavior for the students' benefit versus the adults? And how do we start that conversation between educators and families, I guess, is my question.
Go ahead, Deanna.
Okay, I'm like, we both have so many things to say.
Yeah.
I think from my own experience, so before I moved to Denver for this position, I worked at an alternative high school implementing RP and was essentially in a position of an RP coordinator, but kind of like a dean too. And so I had a lot of interactions with parents, and I think as many educators can relate to, sometimes those relationships are really hard to have because of either trust with the systems in place or a bad experience with a different educator or whatever it might be. And so I think bridging that gap is difficult, but I think one thing to do is trying to invite parents or guardians into schools to participate. And what I mean by that is, when I'm calling and saying, hey, we've got to schedule this meeting or we got to do these things. And some of that is, obligation of some sorts, right, for policies and procedures and whatnot. But I think with having parents being like, so what are you inviting me to? Okay, another meeting, right? And so I think sometimes that's the mindset of like, hey, I got to show up for Johnny because we did this thing in school. But I think what helps change that perspective is when the meeting is not the kind of meeting that they typically go to. And so meetings that I've had with parents, I'm like, introducing myself, we do maybe a warm welcome or at least something to just kind of explain, like, one, to get people started, but also to explain like why this process is different and why, we want to try it. And I think talking through why something is important before you get started give some understanding and a little bit of buy-in. But I think what's really been helpful is when schools are doing a good job of implementing RP and utilizing parents as a support structure for these meetings and maybe even in their classrooms at times, there's a huge level of investment that can happen because they're seeing a change in the behaviors and policies of the schools and educators. And that's something I think where they can go, like, what is this? Like, why did we try something different? And not to be long-winded, but just there's been some success stories personally where I've had parents be like, so what is that? Right? Like, what did we just do? Because I've never seen Johnny cry before about getting in trouble. I've never seen this behavior before. Like, something happened or we were able to talk about feelings. We've never talked about feelings before. And so I think just being able to model that gives parents or guardians more of a curious mindset to know more and maybe kind of transfer that.
Anna, I love that you said using families as a support system versus a consequence. And so we're not calling parents only when we're like, okay, this is what happened today. I love that mindset. Thank you.
I think that goes to phone calls too, right? When we're only calling parents when our child is in trouble. And so that sets up a negative relationship. It's like, okay, Miss Deanna's calling me again, and I already know what she's going to say, and I already know what's going to happen. So I think when we call and say something positive, or we call it with a different solution, right? And we're thinking about being innovative and creative on how to support the student, involving family members, I think is a really big shift than what we traditionally have had in place.
Yeah, I think that's an exciting shift. Thank you.
So how can a parent, if the school, let's say they're not seeing this kind of shift from the school, and they're learning about this for the first time, how can they advocate for themselves? Like what questions can they ask? Who can they call? Just where can they start if they want this shift and they want to see if the school will provide that for them and their child?
I think that's a good question. I think that is, to be honest, a little bit of a barrier because each school operates very differently. And so it's hard to make kind of a generalization or whatnot. But I think, and you're well, feel free to jump in, but I think like generally, or in an ideal situation, a school would have some knowledge, right? Even if they're not perfect in RP, they'd have knowledge on how to do this. I think also working with parents around just asking the simple question of, does this school have an RP coordinator or an ed counselor that knows restorative practices? Being able to at least ask that and understanding like, who could we get to the table with this conversation to help me advocate for my student, right? Is a start. But it is hard because not every school does have an RP coordinator. And so I think sometimes it is, for parents who are listening to this, as easy as, can we do a different kind of conference? Are you familiar with restorative practices? Is there somebody in your school or even district, right, of like, that could support us in this process? Because I'd really like to try this. That could be as simple as it is, because it is very hard to say, go to this person in your school, they're always going to be available, because that's just not how schools are set up. So being direct, and I know that's very hard, but just again, asking those questions and being direct of how you want your student, to participate in different types of meetings and such, I think could be helpful.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I'm curious. I know we probably should be wrapping up, but I am really curious about kind of going back to that idea of intentionality versus impact. And when we're having these conversations and trying to repair the harm, right? Let's say it's between two students or even between an adult and a student. What is your take, or I'm sure you have an opinion on like apologizing for the sake of apologizing, and kind of like, I think a lot of us are taught, say you're sorry. Oh, it's all good, right? So do you have some suggestions as to, instead of just falling on that, like, I'm sorry, okay, we're done. Is there any other recommendations you would have for that?
I think Deanna already brought up probably what our top recommendation is changing the way you have that discussion, right? Is how you get to what happened. Okay, say sorry. Now we're fine. That's again back at what Joy brought up, which is that's adult centered, right? That's a meeting an adult need, which is I want you to stop fighting. I want one of you to feel happier so you'll stop fighting and let's move on. And so I think it's again changing that intention for why we're trying to resolve conflict. It's not just to stop noise or to keep teaching or whatever it is, but to actually resolve what's happening between those two people and come to some new conclusion. So I think it comes down to that curiosity of asking what happened, who is involved, what is your responsibility in this? How do you feel? How do you see us resolving this? And then bringing those people together to come to a resolution. And that's where we start to find the truth of what really happened, right? Like, were there slurs involved in what happened that we're not getting to? Has someone been bullying someone? Like, that's how bullying continues. We just have people say sorry, right? We don't get to the root of what is happening. So it's building in what we call restorative dialogue questions, which are those kind of like what, how, who, where type questions to get you more at the understanding so we can get to a resolution. And I think that that is the difference in thinking about restorative process, which is that I think when we have like a judicial focus on ending conflict, we are getting you to stop that behavior. So we'll allow you to stay in our community. And if you won't stop, then we're going to get you out of our community because we decided how you need to act. And restorative process is completely different, right? The attitude is you're a part of our community. You've caused harm in the community. How can we give you the skills and the space to repair that harm, learn to do different, and to stay in the community, right? And so I think that that is like the basis of what we're doing.
And I would just add too that within RP, the processes are voluntary, right? So we're not forcing anybody to do anything. I think that goes back to what Yerwell was saying around the social discipline window. Like we're working with, we're not asking somebody to apologize, right? And we're not going to force them to do so because we want the process to be as organic and authentic as possible. And I think that's where we get into understanding more root causes or needs for supports and development. And so I am heard a lot of students walk into RP conferences and say, okay, I'm sorry. Let's get this done. We are out of here. I am back to class, right? And we're like, whoa, hold on. And as we unpack that, it's exactly what y'all are saying is like, we just are doing that so the student can go back to class, but students also learn that. Like if I say sorry, I can get on with my day as well. So it's one, undoing what's already kind of been our traditional process, and then also giving them the skills to learn when it is okay to apologize, right? When it's appropriate to apologize. And also when there's times where maybe you're not apologizing because you truly feel differently about something, and being able to do some self-advocacy. And so I think that there's times where I know I'm at fault of saying sorry a lot when I'm like, wait, am I actually sorry for that? Did I do anything? And it's kind of one of those things where it's just a social norm to say it, but there's really not meaning behind it. And so it's a process of thinking, how do we bring meaning back to those words, and how do we put some sort of kind of oomph behind why it is we're apologizing.
Oh my goodness, you guys must have been in my house this morning. I really need to work on these skills. Oh no.
That's what I was just about to ask Jen, because like these skills that you guys are saying, this is the last question for me. As we're talking about like changing the process within the home, like if I'm a parent who's saying, you know what, I'm noticing now that I need to do things a little bit differently. Maybe I'm just now noticing, I'm seeing a reflection like, oh my goodness, that child is me. And like, maybe that's what it is. But like these processes that we've been living under within our homes, and now I want to do something different. And like you were saying before, it's not going to change overnight. And I can't force you to, to see this as normal, especially if I wasn't responding in that way for your entire life. And now I'm deciding to do something different. And now you're pushing back, right? This is me saying this on behalf of a friend, okay? So now you're pushing back. What advice can you give to parents who are trying to adopt these processes within their home? They're getting some pushback, and like we know, these things are going to happen. So what advice can you give them in that process when I'm ready to make that change, but this isn't normal for us yet? So I'm still not seeing the response that I feel I should receive.
Thank you, Ashley.
Same with any long-term change you're making in any relationship, right? Like you change yourself, you don't change the other person. However, as you change, you react differently, you think differently, you make different decisions, you start to structure your life, your boundaries, your relationships differently, right? Like you change as you begin to integrate a new way of responding to the world. And I've experienced it myself. I know Deanna's experienced it with students. I've experienced it with scholars as well as my own family members, right? That as I learned to change in my relationship to them and I responded differently, it gave them space to start doing the exact same. And that's what you're offering someone, I think, honestly, is space to also respond different, to think about themselves differently, to think about themselves in relationship to you in that situation differently, and to start that process of changing too, because we know within counseling, right, that's part of my background, that when someone comes in and says like, we have this problem child. Can you fix this kid so we can go back to normal? It's not going to get fixed because that kid is a part of the system that is the family and the culture and the lifestyle. And they are a symptom really of what's happening, right? Like what's happening in that child. And it's the same thing for every home, for every school group, right? It's like those are a lot of what we're seeing in children are symptoms of other things that they don't understand. So how can we give them space to work on that? And I think it is, whether it's in your home, it's in a school, it's in a book club, whatever it is that you're trying to become restorative, like it's a long-term change process unless you were raised that way. I was not. I was raised in a dominator, hierarchy down home, patriarchal home. So to think about things cooperatively, to think about them differently in that power structure is me literally changing myself and what I was brought up in and then practicing that with others. So I think it's the exact same thing in everyone else's home in different ways.
I keep picturing myself tying a little thread to my finger to remind myself to react differently and to stop and think of those questions in those moments. Like I'm like, or maybe I'll just tattoo them on my hand so that it's always there.
That's it, Jen.
That's not
That's
bad.
the one.
I mean, seriously, so that I can remember to change because yeah, that would
We
definitely.
all need like visual representations too. Like I'm sure a lot of people in here do vision boards, or I don't know if you hang up sayings or art in your house. Like the reason you put that up is because you want to feel a certain way when you look at it, right? You want to be reminded of something. And I don't think it's any different when you talk about like the social discipline window. You need to hang it in your house. Yeah, you need to see it and think about it and stop yourself and have a time for reflection. So I appreciate you saying that because I think we all need that.
And I think also what you're bringing up is the idea that this is a tough process, right? It's not easy. It's not that we're putting a Band-Aid over something like we kind of typically do. We're really diving deep and figuring out like, how do we fix this? How do we move in a different direction? And how do we change our mind when our mind has been this way for, X number of years? Yeah. So I think normalizing that and being like, I'm probably going to have mistakes. I'm not going to be perfect at this. And there's still, I'm still human and I have feelings that I need to regulate as an adult, as a parent, as a teacher, whatever it might be. So I think just talking about that, I guess kind of maybe quickly, some other points is to think about that processing happens without you seeing it. So as a parent, it might be very, very frustrating. I know as an educator, it's very frustrating for me to have the same meeting with students over and over and over again and having them feel like I'm being blown off, right? Of like, that went horribly. Why did I spend 30 minutes in this conference? And then all of a sudden something changes like 4 weeks later, or something happens differently the next day, or whatever it is. And so I just say that as like, it's not the kid wearing a sign on their forehead being like, I am currently changing and processing, right? We don't
charging happening.
We're not going to see that, right? But there is things happening all the time, just like there's things happening in our brains all the time, even though we're focusing on something else. And so I just say that as a reminder, because I know as I'm not a parent, but as an educator in this process every day, all day, it's so frustrating to be like, that meeting blew up. That was terrible. I never want to do that again. And then you keep doing it and you keep trying and being persistent and consistent in that process, you get somewhere. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be hard. But I think it's nice to remember that there's a lot of invisible pieces and components to this as people process and understand and change differently.
I feel like I'm in counseling right now.
Seriously.
All day, this is me getting on my son about why is he not logged on time, and going into my room and sitting here like, oh God, I could have done that better. And I go right back into his room and I let him know, okay, so mommy could have done that better, but you know what I meant. What is mommy trying to say? What's the point of what I'm trying to get at? And I just think this is how we, like you said, some people are brought up and just due to their religion and their upbringing, they have these skills. I can honestly say I was one of the people, and I think that's kind of guided me into this position. I was one of those people who kind of was brought up with a lot of this background, like, well, if you truly love this person, then you're going to forgive and you're going to allow them to grow, and God, changes them and works on them. And so it's one of the things, like you said, it's not going to be easy, and we're going to constantly, but we have that knowledge and we know what to do, and we just got to apply it. And like I said, our kids, they know. My kid reminds me every time of stuff I say and do again, and yes, they're watching our actions, so we have to model it 100%. And Yeah.
I think that brings up a good point too of thinking about inherent power dynamics, right? As a parent to your child or students. And I think one thing to consider is as we are learning to self-regulate ourselves in kind of connection to students self-regulating, there's a lot of opportunity to be vulnerable. And I think, you know, starting maybe some conversations around like, I'm really struggling, like I'm trying these things with you or your brother, and like, I just am not sure what to do, you know, like I'm just having a hard time. Like, I think I might try something else. And right, that might be kind of like, oh, mom might try this or dad might try this or whatever. But I also think that that helps of like, I'm stuck, you know, and I think that that kind of brings, depending on the age and, you know, situation, I think context matters here, but to just be like, I don't know what to do next. I am feeling very frustrated, or I'm really sad that I can't break through this barrier, you know, whatever the language is. But I think bringing those things up and talking to your students or your kids in that way kind of breaks down some of those natural power dynamics of, I'm a parent, I have to act this way, I have to be, you know, kind of perfect or present myself in a certain way to be strong and, you know, consistent and whatever, you know, whatever adjective you want to throw in there. But I think that that can translate as like having some kind of gap in between what really could be talked about if we kind of just mitigated some of those pieces in the middle.
Well, you figure out that it doesn't work. So I think, and I'm one of those people, I've gotten to the point where I was like, is this weakness? Because now I done broke down in front of my kid, let them know that mommy don't know what to do. Can you help me here? Like, what do you need? How can, you know, sometimes that's what you have to do. And that's what they need, is for you to allow them to tell you what they need, express themselves, be able to be human, you know, and it's not about just doing it because mommy said, but really understanding why mommy needs you to do that and what's going to come of that positive. And so, and even I've seen myself, you know, have those moments, and then, you know, there's times when we're still just working on certain things. He's, you know, doing certain things over and over, and I'm just like, why is it not working? I don't know what else to do. So yep, I got work to do. But I know I'm on the right track as far as my thinking and knowing that it starts with me, honestly, and I have to model that. So I think we're on to something here, but it's just getting our educators and getting it within our schools. How do we get this same information out and the mindset change in our schools? And so that's the work ahead.
Thank you, Shalana. I think you wrapped it up really, really beautifully about just, you know, how it really does start with ourselves. That theme has come up in other episodes. And I know that we can keep talking on this. It has been such a pleasure having you both, Ural and Deanna, with us today. I think I can speak for everyone to say that we are very excited to have you both on again for part 2. So again, just thank you for taking the time today. And thank you to all the familiar faces as well. This is another episode of WWBTD. We will see you next time, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.